Hello, my mystical, magical friends. Welcome back to the Oracle Parlor podcast. Step into the parlor and get ready because, as the title of this episode says, we are going to be getting into some spooky story time. Specifically, my experiences with growing up in a haunted house. So, before we begin, the following is based off of my personal experiences, and I'm not here to convince you that I had these experiences or that they're real or that ghosts exist, but just to share these stories with you. So, if you don't believe in ghosts or entities or spirits, that's totally fine. And like always, I will do my best to include my references in the episode description for anyone who is interested, because there will be a section near the end of the episode where I'm going to get into some parapsychology stuff. So if you're a book nerd like me, make sure to check out the episode description after you've listened to the episode. And of course, if you have your own paranormal experiences that you would like to share and possibly have read on the podcast, please send me your stories to oracleparlorpod@gmail.com. That's oracleparlorpod@gmail.com. So, I've already talked a little bit about having grown up in a haunted house in the first introduction episode. And I wanted to go further than just the stories that I shared. So definitely check out that episode. But even if you didn't listen to it, some of the things that I had talked about were one was the biggest story that I had shared in the first episode. The night that all of the kitchen cabinets and drawers were open. Essentially, one night, me and my family were hearing somebody as if they were in the house. However, the house had an alarm system and it sounded like someone was downstairs, yet the alarm never went off. And so my dad went to check it out. He came back upstairs, said it was nothing. We all went to bed. And like I said, found out later through my mom that apparently it wasn't just nothing. All of the kitchen cabinets and doors had been open and nothing was taken or disturbed other than everything being left open. And my dad's rational thought was, it must have been rats. It must have been rats opening every single drawer and cabinet. And how they managed to do that, I have no idea. And that is because my dad did not believe in the paranormal. As a matter of fact, he used to make fun of me for watching ghost shows because I loved ghost hunters when I was a kid. And he didn't believe any of it at all. And honestly, I don't know if he ever had experiences in the home other than this one with the kitchen cabinets and drawers. And I'm sure he did, but he always had some excuse to write it off. And I'll never know because he's not around anymore. But I do know for a fact that both me, my mom, and my sister all experienced weird things in the house that I grew up in. And the only one who did not believe any of it was my father. The house that I grew up in, I should start by saying that it looked like what you would expect a haunted house to look like. It was in the style of a Victorian home, but it was modern. So on the outside, it had almost like this kind of creepy dollhouse look to it. And it was a two-story home. So this is why in the story of the kitchen cabinets being open, we were upstairs hearing something from downstairs. And that was a common occurrence. Sometimes you would be downstairs and it would sound like someone upstairs was walking around, and you wouldn't really think anything of it until you realized that everyone is outside in the backyard or in the garage, and there shouldn't be anyone upstairs. Because even the dog doesn't sound like Boots walking across carpeted floors upstairs. The other thing that I had mentioned in the first episode was seeing mist and something darting around corners. This happened all the time. My mom saw it, I saw it, my sister saw it, and I believe my sister even said when she was younger that to her, she didn't just see mist. She also saw what she thought was the shape of a person, as if she had just seen someone out of the corner of her eye walking past a doorway. And the common thing that always happened was that we just sort of assumed that it was the other person in the other room. And again, much like hearing footsteps or hearing doors upstairs or downstairs closing and things being rummaged around in, we just assumed it was someone else until we realized that we were either home alone or someone was somewhere else in the house that would not have been able to be in that location. So, for example, I would be downstairs in the computer room and I, out of the corner of my eye, thought I saw like a blur of someone walking by in the other room. And so I had assumed it was my sister who was home. So I'd call out to her and ask her to come here or to do something. And then I'd get no response and I'd be really confused. And I would get up, walk over to where I thought I had seen this person, and then realized my sister was nowhere in the area at all. And it wasn't until I went upstairs on the other side of the house to find her doing her own thing. And of course, when I asked her, she says she wasn't even in that area at all. Not only was that a common occurrence, but so was things going missing. And this was actually something I forgot about until I reached out to my sister fairly recently, asking her if she remembered any of the weird things that happened in our haunted house growing up. Oftentimes, my sister would set something down, turn around to do something else. And when she turned back around, that item would be gone. And she would look everywhere for it. And when she finally gave up or was completely exasperated and annoyed, when she returned back to the location she thought she had left the item, it was there again, even though she clearly lost it and it clearly disappeared. And it's interesting because when my sister reminded me of this thing that she had happen quite often at our house, it reminded me that I had this same thing happen to me at my old apartment here in LA. Except for it wasn't like turning around and it would disappear and then reappear. My story took a little more time, whatever this was. So at my last place, I had a tea ball go missing. It's a little ball tea strainer, just a serving for one style tea ball that has a little amethyst at the end. And I use this specific tea strainer just for my divination work, just for tasseomancy. And I had done a tasseomancy session, and my partner had washed this tea ball and set it in the drying rack to dry out. Well, a day or so later, I went to go grab this tea ball again to use it, and I couldn't find it. So I asked my partner, "Hey, where did you put the tea ball?" And my said, "Well, last time I saw it, it was in the drying rack." And I was like, "You didn't put it away?" And they said, "No." And I didn't put it away. So we checked the tea rack, or we checked the dish rack, and there was no tea ball. And so my partner and I decided to go through everything in the kitchen as well as the dining area looking for this tea ball, and we could not find it. We practically flipped that tiny apartment upside down looking for that tea ball, and poof, gone, nowhere to be seen. And I was really upset about it, and I had kind of given up. And it's funny because about a week or two went by, and I was still frustrated about having lost this item. But at the time, My partner and I had also been having experiences in this very specific apartment where I was fairly certain we had some sort of trickster spirit, specifically a fae, because we had a lot of other things going on that made me think this kind of feels like fae trickery and uh, fun and games. So, after I had this thought, I decided to say out loud, "Hey, um, I really would like to have that tea strainer back. It's really important to me, and I use it to help other people with tasseomancy. So, I'd really appreciate it if you put it back." The next morning, I went into the kitchen to go make myself a cup of tea, and I grabbed a mug off of the drying rack in the kitchen. And under that mug, in the drying rack, was the missing tea ball. I saw it, and my first thought was, oh, my partner must have found it, washed it, and put it in the drying rack. I didn't really think anything of it. And later that day, I told my partner, oh, I see that you found the tea ball. And my partner said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, the tea ball is in the drying rack. And my partner said, I never found it. You did you find it? And I said, yeah, in the drying rack, exactly where we had last seen it. So thankfully, the Fae, this spirit, this trickster spirit, decided to actually return it. And it's funny because I had kind of put that association together with this story that my sister told me about the haunted house that we grew up in. She had a similar thing happen, except hers didn't take 2 weeks to return. Hers was usually an instantaneous there and then gone. The other thing that happened quite frequently was things getting really, really uncomfortable and weird when I was home alone. Now, I had already mentioned, we would see out of the corner of our eye someone, we would hear someone, usually rummaging around through things, sometimes walking around. And the vibe in the house generally was, depending, kind of off overall. But it got so much worse when I was home alone. One of the things that really bothered me was every time I was home alone, it felt like I was being watched. Now, the way that my house was located and the way that it was situated, the house was on a hill at the end of a cul-de-sac. So when you look out the windows anywhere in the house, all the other houses are lower down and too far away, and there's no house directly in front of our house. So there's no way anybody could look into the windows. Like you would literally have to get on a ladder and look into the windows if you wanted to peep. You would have to be standing at the front door or on the front porch, and at that point, you'd be able to hear them walking around or see them. But when I was home alone, even upstairs, secluded, it always felt like someone was watching me. And it was this really extreme feeling of almost being like hunted. That kind of feeling that makes your hair stand on end. The feeling that if you were to just turn around at just the right time, you would see the person that's staring daggers into the back of your neck. That's the feeling that I had every time I was home alone. And the activity always got worse. I would be upstairs, I'd get out of the shower, that lingering feeling always there. And as I was drying off and getting ready, getting into my pajamas, it always sounded like someone was downstairs, going through things, knocking things around, walking around. Now, the first time that this happened, when I was home alone, I assumed that someone had come home when I was in the shower, and I simply just did not hear the alarm go off because I was in the shower. And so the first few times this happened, I used to call out, "Hey, I just got out of the shower." No response. I'd get done getting ready, go downstairs only to realize I was still home alone. And yet I could hear people walking around and doing things downstairs. Eventually, I got to the point where when I would get ready, even though I was fully dressed and just simply doing my skincare routine or brushing my teeth or whatever else, I refused to open the door to the bathroom to let the steam out because I was scared, because I could still hear someone downstairs. And if I walked out into the hallway, the sounds would stop, but the feeling of being watched got worse. And I used to run from the bathroom down the hallway into my room. It's an uncomfortable sensation, feeling like someone is just about to grab you, yet nobody's there. It's an uncomfortable sensation knowing that you're hearing what sounds like people downstairs, and yet no one is there. And when I say it sounds like people, I mean it was never talking, never, ever talking, always shuffling around, always things being moved around. But when you would go to look, everything would be in its right place. Nothing would be disturbed. And again, this house was a modern house. It wasn't that old. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was built like in the 80s. So it was fairly new, albeit looking like an older Victorian dollhouse. There shouldn't have been really anything there because most people think a haunted house has to be an old house, and that's not always the case. Well, because I was avoiding leaving the bathroom and I was avoiding being out in the house when I was alone, I think it started to pick up on that and it tried a new tactic. It started to call the house. I know it sounds really weird, but when I was home alone, our landline to the house always would ring as soon as I had dried off and gotten dressed, but still had the door closed. The phone would always ring at around the same time of me getting done, getting ready. And if I were to go check the phone, because the first time it happened, I didn't think anything of it. Just like when I heard people downstairs, I didn't think anything of it the first time. So the first time the phone rang, I thought it was one of my parents calling to check in on me or to tell me to do something, that they needed something, or that they were coming home. So if you exit the bathroom, immediately to the right was my dad's office where he had a phone, the landline. And so the phone would ring and I would go to answer it. And when I'd pick up the phone, I'd say hello, and there would be static. But not like static like a TV screen static. It was kind of like silence with a little bit of a crackling and popping sound of like a distant staticky sound, but not exactly, as if the connection wasn't super clear. And I would say hello a couple times, shrug, hang up, and walk away. And at first, again, I didn't really think much of it. I would hang up, walk away, and then the phone would ring again. And I would go back. And this time, I would check the caller ID. And the caller ID always said unknown, which was creepy enough as it is, given the situation. I would answer again, hello, and still nothing. So, first time that happened, didn't think anything of it. And then I started to notice the pattern. that it would always seem to happen, like I said, around the same time when I got out of the shower, got done getting ready, was too scared to leave the bathroom, still doing my stuff with the door closed. It was like it was forcing me to leave the bathroom when I didn't want to, when I was already too scared to. And then the calls got worse because they went from just the weird silent static to, I swear, the last time I remember picking up the phone, because I stopped eventually after this. The last time I had picked it up, there was a faint, labored breathing on the other end. And it had scared me so badly. I threw down the phone, slammed it down, ran to my bedroom, closed the door, locked myself in, and refused to leave my bedroom for the rest of the evening because it was just too upsetting to me. And I laugh talking about it now because I am such a believer in having curiosity over fear, using discernment with this. Now, could somebody have been just simply calling my house, doing a prank call? Absolutely. However, the thing that still stands out as really bizarre to me is that this only ever happened when I was home alone. That it was always around the same time of me getting done, getting ready, doing something in the bathroom. Always the timing of it was too weird to be a coincidence. Another thing that was common was, well, in general, me and my sister, we tend to share a lot of dreams. And I want to do a whole episode sharing with you all my weird dream stories from dream premonitions to shared dreams. So I will save that for another episode, but there is one particular thing that happened that was really bizarre. When me and my sister lived in this house, I had had a nightmare where in the nightmare, I woke up in my sister's bedroom, in her bed, and I got out of the bed and walked over to her large mirror that hung on the wall. And in the mirror, I saw a little girl, probably about 4 to 5 years old, that was wearing almost like a flower girl dress from a wedding, like a white, raggedy gown. Like raggedy because it should have been a pretty lacy, sheer skirt and white top, but it looked dirty and old and raggedy. And she had a veil covering her face, so I couldn't see her face. And she had dirty blonde, messy hair. And I remember in this dream looking into the mirror, seeing her, and then looking to my right where she should have been standing in the dream in the real world. And she wasn't there. And then I looked back in the mirror, but she was still standing there. And then I woke up. And that dream had absolutely terrified me. And I was so freaked out by it. But I didn't say anything because I still have a lot of weird dreams. And so I just didn't really think to mention it until about, I don't know, maybe like a few weeks, maybe a few months later. Me and my sister were talking about our weird dreams. And my sister tells me, yeah, I had a really creepy dream a few weeks ago. And in the dream, I woke up in my bed and I sat up in my bed, and to my left, next to me in my bed, standing by my bed, was this little girl in a flower maiden, like a wedding outfit, but it looked dirty and she had dirty blonde hair and her face was obscured. My sister described the same exact little girl that I had seen in my nightmare. And the only difference was in mine, I could only see her through the mirror in my sister's room. And in my sister's nightmare, my sister could only see her standing next to her bedside. And then my sister woke up terrified. Like I said, we've got a lot of stories of shared nightmares, so I will share that another time. Now, I had mentioned that we never really heard any talking before in the house, but there was one time when my sister was younger that I remember waking up in the middle of the night because my sister had gone to my parents and she was very upset. She was really shaken. And it had woke me up because of the commotion of everybody talking. And I went to go see what was going on. And my sister had apparently, and I don't know if she remembers this, so I'm gonna have to ask her about this after I record this episode, or maybe she'll listen. But I went to go over to my family to see what the commotion was about. And my sister said that she had woken up to the sound of crying coming from her dolls. And it had scared my sister so badly that she ran out of her room and woke up my parents. And my parents had simply said, "Oh, you were just dreaming." Now, could she have been dreaming? Sure. But it wasn't like a night terror. She was wide awake. And it scared her even more when she realized she was wide awake and heard this sound. And I had a similar experience years later. When I was in high school, and I remember specifically it was high school, because these experiences didn't just span me being super little. This was the entire time my family had lived in this home. But when I was in high school, there was one night, and I clearly remember it to this day. I woke up in the middle of the night for no real reason, not because of any dream or nightmare, not because I heard a sound or anything of that nature. I just simply woke up naturally. And in the corner of my room, across the room from my bed, in the darkest corner of my room, where no light could reach simply because of how the room was set up, I remember seeing this 7 to 8 foot tall creature, is the way I can describe it, that had nothing but a shadow mass that didn't look quite human. It had an obvious head and shoulders, but it had glowing red eyes where the eyes should have been. And I could faintly make out what seemed to be almost like a beard of tentacles. To the point that the next day at school, when I described this to my friends, I described it as being Cthulhu-esque, long arms, tentacles on the face, glowing red eyes. But I couldn't really make out the rest of it because it just sort of melted into the shadows. And I can still clearly see this to this day. And the eyes that were glowing, they weren't like glowing super bright. It was just sort of like I could tell that they were kind of red amongst the shadows, but they were slightly like brighter than the shadows. And when I saw this, I looked right at it. And because I was still half asleep, now here's the thing. I was awake, but I was so tired and I was so done with it that it was almost like Sleepy Jenny saw this thing and literally said out loud, "Nah, no, uh-uh." And then I turned around and face planted back into my pillow because I had sat up, looked at this thing, and went, "Nope." Turned around, went back to sleep, and ignored it. And I didn't even realize what had happened. Like my brain didn't even process that I had seen this terrifying looking shadow thing in the corner until I woke up the next morning. And then it hit me that I had seen something really freaky and it then freaked me out. But I was just so wanting to get back to sleep that I was like, no, no, thank you. And it's funny because I had learned about sleep paralysis demons. Like, this is a common thing. So, for anyone who doesn't know, a sleep paralysis demon is when we fall asleep. And again, I'm no scientist. Don't quote me on this stuff. Definitely look into it if you're interested. But as far as I understand it, when we are asleep, our body actually goes into a state of paralysis. The reason why our body does this is so that we don't accidentally fight or run in our sleep. Like if you've ever seen a dog who's like really heavy duty sleeping, having a wild dreams, sometimes dogs will start running in their sleep, and some dogs will even get up and run into a wall. It's very sad when you see it. Like they're okay, but our body goes into a state of paralysis to prevent us from hurting ourselves or others accidentally while we're asleep. So sometimes with sleep paralysis demons, what happens is our eyes will open and we will become awake. However, our body is still in full paralysis. So we can't move and we can't do anything. And I believe there's this idea that because we are still technically sleeping, it's almost like we start to see things. Our brain starts to project things of our dreams into the reality that we are seeing. And unfortunately, most of the time, those things are quite scary and quite upsetting. And people often report seeing demon-like things or shadow creatures and things of that nature. But the key is that when this happens, you can't move, you can't talk, you can't do anything. And when I saw this thing, I could still move. Like I said, I sat up in my bed. I looked right at this thing. I said no. And then I went back to sleep, laid back down, face planted. I'm, again, I like to be skeptical. I could have been half asleep and I could have still been dreaming. But I saw this thing so clearly with my eyes, not in my mind's eye, with my physical eyes. And with everything else that was going on in the house, I would not be surprised if there was something there. But that was still not the scariest experience that I had in that house. And you may be thinking, okay, hold on. How is that not the scariest thing that you experienced? Well, when I was in community college, and I believe I was about 19 or 20 when this happened. This was right before I moved out and went to school here in LA. I was still living in the house, but at the time, it was just me and my dad living in the house. And I had moved in to my sister's room that she used to be in, the same room where she heard the crying. And my room was directly across from my father's room. Well, one night I couldn't sleep. And because of that, I was sitting wide awake on my bed. And I distinctly remember I was on my computer talking via Messenger with my then boyfriend at the time. And it was so interesting because that night I had my blinds open. And because I was on the second story and this house was situated on this like small hill, you could see out across the valley of Sacramento. And you could see all the way to the Nevada, Sierra Nevada mountain range. And so I had my blinds open. And I distinctly remember that that night there was a massive thunderstorm happening in the distance. And I had my blinds open so I could stay up and watch the lightning. Now, this storm was far enough away that I could watch it, I could see the lightning, but I couldn't hear it. So I would just see flashes in the sky and see the lightning bolts in the far distance. And I thought it was so cool because I love thunderstorms, especially if I can't hear them because the thunder sometimes is a little intense for me, if I'm being honest. So I was sitting in my bed, chatting with my partner, my boyfriend at the time, and watching the lightning. And as I'm sitting in bed, I hear my dad say, Jennifer, like he was calling my name. Now, I go by Jenny. I've always gone by Jenny. But if my dad was unhappy about something, he would say Jennifer, my full name. And so I heard him call my name, and I didn't want to get out of bed because it was like 2 a.m. and I was busy sitting in bed watching the lightning. So I just said, yeah, no response. I went, Dad, what? No response. So I was annoyed. And I got up and I went to his bedroom and I found him asleep in bed with his TV on and on mute, how he typically fell asleep. And my brain couldn't process what had just happened. I clearly heard my father's voice call my name, and not just Jenny, Jennifer, the name that they often used again, like when I was a kid. And so I stood there for a moment trying to process and decided, even though I was very freaked out, it must have just been me. It must have just been me. It must have just been me. So I walked back to my bedroom and I was typing up to my boyfriend at the time how weird it was. I thought I heard my dad call my name. And as I was typing this response, I then heard it again. My full name, Jennifer, except for this time, it was a woman's voice. And she said, Jennifer, in a really condescending way. This was a voice that I did not recognize. There was no one else in the house except for me and my dad. But I clearly, with my physical ears, heard a woman who I don't even know say my name in a very condescending way. And at that point, I had full body chills. My hair stood up on end. It felt like my gut left my body. My soul left my body. My gut dropped like a stone. And I felt sick because I must have looked like one of those cartoon characters when they see Casper for the first time and they turn completely sheet white before they run off screaming. Because that's exactly what happened. I felt absolutely horrified and I leapt out of my bed and I ran into my father's bedroom and I woke him up and I said, Did you just call my name? And he was still half asleep and he's like, What? And I said, Just a few minutes ago. You called my name, right? What did you want? You called my name. Because at this point, I was trying to find any excuse. Even if it was a woman's voice I had heard in a very distinct way, I was trying to convince myself that my dad must have said something or done something. And I was so panicked. And he was just like, No, 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 I didn't say your name. I was asleep. And I rambled, just panicked to him, telling him, I heard you. I heard you call me. And then I heard someone else say my name. And of course, I'm talking to the biggest skeptic here. So he says, You must have been asleep. And I said, I was wide awake. I've been online. I can't sleep right now. I couldn't process. I gave up talking to my dad at that point. And I went back to my bedroom, absolutely terrified. I did not sleep at all that night. To this day, that is still the clearest voice that I have ever heard with my physical ears. A disembodied voice, no reason for it. And yet I actually heard it with my physical ears, which is so rare. There's only been one other time, and if you listen to this story about my abuelita's haunted house, I talk about how I heard like a mumbling coming from the floor. You can go listen to that episode. But never have I ever, even to this day, heard anything so incredibly clear, even with my clairaudience, which again, if you've listened to episodes, I'm not a fan of having clairaudience because it kind of freaks me out. And this really freaked me out and was the scariest thing that I ever had happen. Now, again, I today try to hold more curiosity over fear, but at the time, I had yet to reclaim the title of witch. And I, yes, was doing a lot of practices that could be considered very witchy, divination and different things like that. But I had yet to reclaim my power. And one of the things was feeling really powerless against things like ghosts and spirits and the paranormal. At some point, I don't even remember what. I could not tell you at all. It's not that I'm keeping this story to myself, but I literally cannot remember. But at some point, something had happened that absolutely terrified me. All I remember is being absolutely terrified, so incredibly scared that I grabbed the holy water that was from my baby baptism that my parents kept in my room. I knew exactly where it was. I grabbed it and I put holy water over every doorway and every window in my bedroom because I was so scared. And I was trying to protect my space from whatever was in the home. And I remember, because at the time, this was before I heard my name called too, which to me is the scariest memory that I have. But apparently something happened when I believe I was a teen at that point. I may have been a preteen. I don't remember. I can't even remember exactly how old I was, but I just remember doing this. I put this holy water up, and because I was still at that time pretty Catholic, I was still pretty Catholic. I remember praying to not experience it anymore. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to have the experiences. I was done. And I remember just being so afraid and praying so hard. I was done. I didn't want it. I didn't want it. And at the time I was into reading about paranormal in regards to like psychic uh, auras and energy and things of that nature. I knew a little bit about it because I had always been reading stuff like that as a kid. And so instinctively, this wasn't anything I had read in a book, but instinctively, I had done like this visualization where I remember like locking myself down. And in my mind, I was thinking, I'm protecting myself. I'm closing myself off from anything being able to harm me or affect me. But what I was actually doing was I was closing off my psychic abilities. And at the time, I didn't know that's what it would have been called. But that is essentially what I did because that is what I prayed for. That was the intention I set. That was the visualization that I did to shut it all down. And it took me a long time to open that door back up and feel confident enough to say, I can open these doors and windows again and not be scared. I reclaimed my power. And that came from reclaiming the title of witch and educating myself on paranormal activity and energy work and protection magic and all these beautiful things that I absolutely love now. And this is why I'm such a huge proponent, like believer in protection magic and shielding yourself and warding your locations and taking your power back to say that you can do these things and that these things, while yes, they can be scary, they don't have to rule you. They don't have to be scary. You can absolutely put up boundaries with these things and say, no, mm-mm, I don't have to be afraid of this. But it took me a long time to get to that point. And I'm here now. And one of the things is I I don't believe that what was going on in my house was actually a haunting as we know it. Here I've been talking about a haunted house this whole time, but I call it a haunted house because I believe it's the easiest way for people to understand it. I don't believe that what was happening in my house was what we know as a haunting, which is a ghost or a spirit of a person or some sort of entity. Uh, but now that I know a lot more, what I believe happened was a PK manifestation turned egregore. And these are two topics I could probably do a whole episode on, but I want to touch on this here. So, in the field of parapsychology, a PK manifestation or psychokinetic manifestation can be caused by a living person in the home. So, when this happens, a PK manifestation can actually take on the characteristics of a typical haunting. So, what does that mean? That means objects moving and disappearing. Check. Doors, cabinets opening and closing on their own. Check, check. Knocking or walking around. Sounds of somebody walking around. Check, check. Everything that describes a PK manifestation checks out. And in the parapsychology field, it's believed that PK manifestations are caused by a person who is experiencing major change or major upsets in their life where they don't have control and they don't have an outlet to process their feelings. So they unknowingly end up projecting that energy, that emotional energy outward, lashing out at everyone, including themselves. And sadly, because of this, PK manifestations are often associated with households that have trauma and abuse. I remember in one of the books that I read, and I believe it's in the book that I'm going to be including in the description of this episode, that when they get reports of a haunting from a family, the first thing that those people will do is ask about the living situation in the home and check in with children to see if there's anything possibly going on in regards to family abuse, emotional, physical thing, any sort of traumatic things that's happening in the household that may cause that. That's not to say that that's always the case. There's also a belief in the parapsychology field that typically they would see this in households where there may be young people going through puberty, as well as older people going through like the midlife transition of their life. And the idea is that these are points in time in life where a lot is changing in our physical bodies, in our brain chemistry, that it's a liminal space. Not quite a kid, not quite an adult, not quite, young and spry anymore, but not quite old either. the midpoint between here and there, that liminal in between. It's also been associated with people who have latent, heightened psychic abilities that they yet do not understand and therefore cannot control it. Now, I want to be perfectly clear. Every single person has the ability to be psychic. Every single person has innate intuition. That is not a question and not a debate at all in my mind. Now, of course, I can never say with 100% clarity because in this kind of field, psychic, spiritual, um, parapsychology, paranormal, we can't say anything 100% without a doubt. This is my belief, though, that every single person has intuitive, innate intuition, and that everyone has the ability to take their intuition and hone it into honing those psychic senses into something more. And so, I definitely do still believe that there may be people who simply don't know that they have those abilities and maybe shutting them out. And then it causes these PK manifestations because they can't process it. They don't know how to deal with it. And therefore, it exudes out of them in a different way, unfortunately. Now, I had said that I thought this was a PK manifestation turned egregore, and I will get to the egregore part in a second. But I do want to clarify that my household checks not only all the boxes of what a PK manifestation can look like a typical haunting, but also unfortunately checks a lot of the boxes of what a lot of parapsychologists believe can cause PK manifestations, trauma in the household, abuse, and people going through these liminal spaces in their life, in their body. So, in Western esotericism, let's talk about egregores. In Western esotericism, an egregore is an autonomous entity that is created by the energy of a collective thought projection. Now, that's a lot. And it's so funny because I, for the longest time, refused to tell people what I believed was actually going on in my haunted house that I grew up in, simply because PK manifestation and egregores have long not really been in the public eye and pop culture and the consciousness of collective and you really have to kind of be into the paranormal and parapsychology in order to understand these kinds of topics. And so I just never bothered to get into these details with most people when I share these stories. I simply say I grew up in a haunted house, even though I know that isn't exactly what it is anymore. However, you may be familiar with the term egregore because recently on TikTok in the last year, it has really blown up the idea of egregores. And again, I could do a whole episode on egregores and stuff. I would love to talk to a guest about egregores, but it has come into a lot of public knowledge now, egregores, though I do believe a lot of it, because a lot of people just get their information off of TikTok and then don't go researching. A lot of people don't fully understand what an egregore is, from my opinion, from what I've seen. Not to say everybody on TikTok doesn't know what an egregore is, but unfortunately, the majority don't seem to have a grasp. But you may have heard this term. And so I believe that what we had was a case of a PK manifestation that caused fear in us. And we had then turned around and we were projecting ideas of a ghostly entity being the cause of what was happening in the house and therefore created an egregore. Because, like I said, an egregore is an autonomous entity. So it can, not all the time, you can assign it a goal. Again, we could talk about it, but in another episode, it's pretty deep to get into. But it is an entity that is created from energy. And more often than not, it can be a collective thought and belief, essentially, and a thought projected outward into creating this entity. And so This egregore in my house was one that was made out of fear and was creating fear to continue reflecting back our belief in there's a scary entity in this home. And after a time, I believe that this egregore just sort of eventually became a sort of parasitic entity that was feeding off of fear, which is why it would go out of its way to create situations that caused more fear. The example that I gave from when I was young and the kitchen drawers and cabinets were open, that is typical PK manifestation. Hearing people walking around, that's typical PK manifestation. But when it got to the point of always feeling watched, getting the phone calls, hearing the crying, and eventually having my name being called, it had escalated beyond just weird occurrences that are typical to a haunting and got to a point where it felt very direct and malicious in the sense of maliciousness of, I want to eat your fear. And the reason why I say this is what I believe is because I actually decided to take it upon myself to ask my spirit team what was going on in my house so I could take care of it, which I will get to in a moment. But the last thing I want to say on this is that we can sometimes consciously or unconsciously create our own hauntings because, like I'm talking about with egregores, they reflect us. It gives us the energy that we feed it. It returns it back to us. It's like a mirror. If we feed it fear, that's what it's going to give us in return. Fear. As Dana and Greg Newkirk, who I absolutely appreciate everything they do for the paranormal community, as they say, we kind of become our own ghost machines. This happens a lot. And I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned it on the podcast before, but back when I used to work at the Mystic Museum as a tarot reader years ago, someone came in with what they believed was a haunted doll, and uh, the staff was so freaked out by this haunted doll that they believed that was brought in that they had asked me to psychically tune in and see if the doll was really haunted because nobody wanted to touch the doll, nobody wanted to interact with it. But when I tapped into the doll, what I was sensing wasn't a spirit, wasn't an entity, wasn't a conscious being of any kind. It was simply the projection of fear onto the doll. It was this essentially like a baby egregore. People had in the household had projected so much fear, so much anxiety onto the doll that it ended up absorbing all that energy and projecting it back into the world and caused what seemed like a haunting, but it wasn't. It was what they had already put out there and kept projecting and kept getting it reflected back to them. That's not to say that they weren't having those experiences. That's not to say that they weren't having things that were scaring them. But it kind of becomes almost like this mirror bouncing back and forth. So that's a topic that I could get into much deeper, but we simply don't have time in this episode. So to wrap up, as I had mentioned, I had actually decided I was going to take care of this thing. And my dad, I knew was going to be going out of town while I was going to be in town, because at the time, this was only like maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I forget. But I was going to be visiting Sacramento and I knew my dad was going to be out of town. And so I wanted to get rid of what was going on in the house because I had heard more stories from my mom and my sister about my dad having weird things happen that he wasn't talking about. And when I say weird things, I mean like really bizarre accidents. And my initial gut intuitive reaction to hearing those stories was it's the thing in the house. It was just, I simply knew it. I knew it as fact as soon as my mom and my sister had told me what was going on. I just knew that these weird accidents that kept happening was the thing in the house. So to prep going, I decided to sit with my spirit team and ask them, what is really going on at that house? Is there a spirit there? Is there a ghost? Is there a person? I had this feeling that it may have been an egregore, but I wasn't exactly sure. So I sat down, I pulled cards, and I went into a journeying meditation to go talk with my spirit team, in which they told me, yeah, what is going on there is this thing that you've projected out kind of came conscious and feeds on fear, and it knows that your dad isn't the type to believe in this sort of thing, so it's gotten worse and worse because it's trying to get what it wants to feed and is essentially becoming sort of like this black hole sucking in all negativity and causing all these problems. And so I had decided I wanted to know how to get rid of it. And so I'm not going to get into the details because it was extremely personal and it was extremely powerful. But I had some unexpected spirits come through to help me do the work of clearing the home of this thing, as well as the nest that it had built. Because what I had been shown by my spirit team was this egregore that was feeding off of fear that had become a parasitic entity had created sort of like a nest throughout the home of all this gunk. And so not only did I need to clear out and get rid of this now parasitic entity, I also had to clear out the gunk that it had built its spider webs onto. So I went and visited my dad's place while he was gone, and I cleansed that entire property, not just the home. I did the outside, the inside, back. And I'm sure the neighbors saw me going around the property line, but I really didn't care because I just wanted this thing gone. Because not only was it affecting my father negatively, which, as you know, if you've listened to the podcast, I did not have a great relationship with my dad. So, to be honest, it wasn't like I was like super, super sad and concerned about my father. It was that this thing had been there for so long, and I felt like I had a duty now that I have reclaimed my power to really disperse of it as a way of taking my power back from it. And not only that, but I had been having nightmares ever since I moved out. And all of the nightmares that I had always took place in that house. And yes, I had a lot of trauma in that house. And yes, I had a lot of things going on in that home that it would make sense that if I'm going to have a nightmare, it would take place there. But again, there was this weird, deep intuitive knowing that the reason why I was having those nightmares was kind of connected to this thing at the house. And I couldn't explain why I felt that way. It was just something that felt like that made sense to me. And that was the other reason why I wanted to go and do this clearing, because I wanted to cut any cord that it had to me in the process of getting rid of it completely. So I did this extremely intense ritual and got rid of it. And it was amazing because as I was doing the ritual, I even saw an incredible thing happen with wildlife. Again, it's personal, so I'm not going to get into the details, but there was a really bizarre occurrence that happened with wildlife that felt so symbolic to what I was doing and also didn't make sense for the area. I had never seen anything like that my entire life growing up there. And it just felt so symbolic to what I was doing. And it felt like kind of like a confirmation of like, yes, this is it. This needs to be done. And when I left and came back to LA, my mom and my sister had told me a couple days later, because they knew I was going to be doing this at the house, at my dad's house. They told me that they noticed a significant change in the home. And I had noticed it too when I had walked out, but I didn't tell them how I felt when I left. I just told them, I'm going to go, I'm going to take care of this thing, and hopefully you'll take care of the issues. And how my mom and my sister described it was a weight being lifted, and that the stagnant air that was in the house was like clean and it was easy to breathe, and that they no longer felt like something was hovering over their shoulder or watching them anymore. And it stayed that way for a really long time until my dad had passed, and the house is now gone to someone else. So that's the full story of my childhood haunted home and growing up in a haunted house that really wasn't haunted, but my own self-made haunting that took on a life of its own, really. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please consider leaving a review for the podcast. Rate it, review it. It really, really helps a lot. And if you'd like to support me in continuing to make this podcast, because I don't have any ads, it would be amazing if you would consider joining my Patreon. You can do $1 a month if you enjoy the podcast and just want to throw a buck my way every month. Or if you'd like to join the higher tiers of Patreon, you would get access to monthly magical workshops, an online Discord community, as well as so much more. And don't forget, you can always send in your own personal experiences with the paranormal and get a chance to have it read on the podcast. And you can do that by emailing oracleparlorpod@gmail.com. And of course, if you're interested in actually booking a one-on-one reading or a consultation with me, you can do so at my website, phantasmawitch.com. That's FANTASMAWITCH.com. Thank you so much for joining me in my spooky stories. And the last thing I want to say is remember curiosity over fear. I know a lot of the things I shared today were quite spooky and they did absolutely scare me as a kid, but I would not have reacted the same way if I had those experiences now. And that's because I'm a different person and I have more knowledge and I try to approach things with curiosity instead of fear. And it's okay to still be scared. It's natural to be scared of unnatural things, of supernatural things. You're allowed to feel scared, and that's okay. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time in the parlor.